Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. For any avid listeners, you will know that a theme I like to talk about a lot on my podcast is outgrowing people, but also outgrowing old versions of yourself. And in the last episode, I chatted about, sitting down with yourself, having a very hard conversation with yourself and asking yourself, am I happy in life? Is this where I want to be? Is my life, I suppose, going in the direction that I wanted to go in? Am I happy? Are the people I surround myself with the people I actually want to surround myself with? All of these really hard questions. And I said in the podcast, if the answer is no, you need to take the courage to start to change. And change doesn't happen overnight. You have to make small changes and repeat them in order to get to where you want to go. And I think a lot of the times people can turn back, and I'm not going to go over the whole podcast again, but I think a lot of the time people can turn back and go back to their old selves because it's uncomfortable. Changing your job, changing the person you're spending your life with, changing the place you live, that's not going to be easy. But I think if you're willing to trust the process and get stuck in, you will meet other people along the way, like-minded people, because I really think that you attract what you become. And not to give my guest today an already bigger head than he has, but Dan is my guest today. And I think Dan is one of those people. So, when I started to make this change in my life and ask myself all these mad questions that, are difficult and, do require you to be very, very vulnerable and lonely, I suppose, sometimes. But when I started to ask myself all these questions and change my life and leave my job, it was quite lonely because I was no longer surrounding myself with people I had previously surrounded myself with. But I started to meet a lot of people along the way who were like-minded, who had the same goals as me, who were taking those hard steps to actually live a life that they wanted to live. And yeah, I've met a lot of people, not a lot, maybe a handful of people in my current situation, I think, along the way. And Dan is one of them. So last week, before I recorded my episode, me and Dan, Dan is my producer of the podcast. We had a conversation before I pressed record, and it was like 40, 50 minutes long. And I just said, fuck Dan, we should have pressed record and that be a podcast episode in itself, because I think we're quite like-minded. We enjoy the same type of conversation, deep, meaningful conversation, not interested really in surface level and just talking absolute shite, although that's probably half of it. Dan Campion, although I can call him Champion if I want, is on the podcast today. Welcome, Dan. That's a long-winded introduction.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my head is swelling through the headphones.
So Dan, I wanted to have a chat with you today to kind of highlight the fact that I can talk on my podcast, right, about change and all of these things. And I know people can look at me and be like, yeah, it's easy for Kellie. She's this online personality. She has these followers. She has success, and I think people don't equate that to other people in their life maybe. So I wanted to have a conversation with someone who's been through the process, the same as me, made the hard decisions. It could have went fucking belly up. We could be literally, ringing our old employers being like, please take me back.
We might still, yeah.
And we might still, absolutely. But it's refreshing to meet other people who took the risk. I really think no risk, no reward. People are afraid to step outside the box, step outside the mold for fear of failure. And I get it. I absolutely get it. But if you want to progress or excel or do what we've done, and I'm not saying we've excelled, but we've stepped outside the mold. We have tried to set up our own businesses and live life on our own terms. And yeah, we're succeeding right now. Who knows what will happen in the future? But I think I was like, I want to get someone on to show people it's not just me on here talking shite about my experiences. This can be a real life thing. You can change your life, the direction of your life. So I think you've done that as well. And I wanted to chat to you and take us back to the start and get us up to where you are today and what you've done.
Okay, I'm going to try and make this really interesting because I said my perspective is a bit different because I run the studio here. So I have hundreds of conversations come through this place. And some conversations are like this, and there's people from all different walks of life. So my perspective is really different now because I have such exposure to people's stories and people who've done pretty, in my opinion, exceptional things. So it's now looking back at my life in the context of having had all these conversations, it's different. My story is different, because like when I listen to all the origin stories, I'm like, no one really cares who I am or like what I did. But to try and make it relevant to the point you're trying to get across to people today, very quickly, had a great childhood, amazing family, loads of support. So there's no like rags to riches story. There's no riches either. So I'm still in the middle. But I had a great support system. So I didn't have a bad upbringing that I was rebelling against, that had forced me to go down this path or whatever. Looking back retrospectively now, in my 20s, in my teens and my 20s, I was a huge introvert, loads of anxiety, I was weird, right? Because on the outside, I was everybody's friend. I was in all the groups. I played a load of sport at a relatively high level, not a super high level, but relatively high level. But I also was with the guys playing computer games and doing airfix models and all that sort of stuff. So I fit in kind of everywhere, but didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. And that's probably people listening are familiar with what that feels like. And that was kind of the theme of my teens and my 20s. The environment wasn't bad. I wasn't bullied in school. I didn't have any of these things going on, but I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. So there was that sense of loneliness the whole time, or that I didn't have a place and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And that led to me, when I was making decisions about what I wanted to do in school, I repeated my leaving cert, as I said to you before. Because the first time, was I academic? You asked me this for the podcast. I wasn't particularly academic, but I was very good when I applied myself to something. So in my first leaving cert, didn't apply myself to anything. And every comment from the teacher was, loads of potential, could try harder. And that was the kind of the running commentary from all my teachers. Didn't do great in my first leaving cert, so didn't really get the options I wanted. And it was my mom. You're going to see a theme with all my stories here now. There's always a person who comes to save the day for me. It's never me making a great decision. My mom said to me, "You'll regret this if you don't give yourself more options. Would you please just go back and repeat the leaving cert?" And I remember I was working on the as a greenkeeper at the time, and for the summer, didn't know what I was going to do. Had put down like science and UCD and all that kind of stuff, and just knew it wasn't what I wanted to do. Went back, repeated the leaving cert, did quite well in the leaving cert, gave myself loads of options, and I did a course called Athletic Therapy and Training in DCU, sports physio essentially. So 4-year degree in sports physio. So that's my background, which people are like, "You're running a studio now, you did sports physio." But that kind of kickstarted the growth journey, really. Finished that course. The one thing I knew I didn't want to be, sports physio. So I find that in college a lot. Like, you go to college, if anyone has been to college or done stuff like this, you learn more about what you don't want to do than actually what you do want to do. And when you come out of college, I think the biggest learning for me was how to learn, how to decide what I want and what I don't want. That's what I learned anyway in college, but I knew I didn't want to be a sports physio. So 4 years, but I suppose it gives you options. While I was there, a very good friend of mine that I met in school, South African guy, his dad ran a GP clinic. So I was doing some part-time work at the GP clinic. And when I left, he offered me a room to see clients for the physio. And again, very lucky. He gave me the opportunity, took the opportunity. And I ended up there for 12 years. I only did the physio stuff for about 2 years. And I very quickly became integrated into what he was doing in the GP practice. And to give people just a bit of context, when you train somewhere like South Africa, as a doctor, compared to somewhere like Ireland, in South Africa, you could be the only doctor for 150 miles. And there's a lot of rural medicine. So a lot of these guys and girls train in a really broad spectrum of medicine. They can do a lot of different things. When you're in Ireland, you don't have to do that because you're going to be a GP, you're going to be in family medicine, going to be a surgeon, whatever. You tend to kind of narrow down and specialize. And that system exists in South Africa, but you just have to be able to do a lot more over there, because I remember him describing to me one day he's dealing with a knife wound and he had to like stick his finger in the wound and perform surgery on the floor of the waiting room because they couldn't get someone at the hospital. And then the next day he's out doing like tribal circumcisions 300 miles from the local, wherever the nearest civilization was. Like, so he was doing everything. And it just gives you a much broader view of medicine, health, human beings. So when I started working with him, I hit the way he did medicine. I was immediately like, wow, this is totally different. He's looking at people like people and not like a collection of symptoms. And it was so new to me. So that's what kind of kept me interested, and I became more involved in the medical side of things. Didn't train as a doctor or anything like that, but I was kind of a surgical assistant in certain areas. I helped the business development. Then I heard podcasts, right? So mid-20s, podcast came into my life. Of course, Joe Rogan and all the guests you were having on talking crazy stuff about health and performance. And that inspired me to kind of dig a little bit deeper into the human side of health. So I would hear something like Ben Greenfield, people might be familiar with, or like Andrew Huberman now, or all these guys would say something about like anxiety or addiction or metabolic health or weight loss. And I'd go to the doctor and say, first of all, is this real? And he would say, okay, well, this isn't. And then second of all, can we do this in Ireland? And he would generally say, look, it's not how it's done here, but here's an approach we could take. And over the course of about 4 or 5 years, we changed the model from a GP clinic to a functional medicine clinic. So we were working with people from a lot of metabolic health, so people with lifestyle disease, obesity, liver disease, alcoholism, depression and anxiety symptoms, stuff like that. And we were I was supporting him, he was the doctor, taking like a big picture approach to health. So Kellie would walk in and it's not what's wrong with you and here's a solution for what's wrong with you. It's who are you and how are you feeling and what's your life look like, and then what are your symptoms, and then here's a huge blood panel that we can look at as well. And Dr. Sam would tie all of these different factors together and say, okay, well, this is a picture of who you are right now and your health status, and these are the options that we can look at. And for me, I was like, this is a totally different way of looking at people and doing medicine. So that was kind of the last 4 or 5 years of the clinical practice. And we developed that. We had a kind of protocol where somebody come in and go through like an NCT, and then would have multiple options and could work with obviously a medical team, or we could refer on to people for lifestyle or performance or strength and conditioning or health or whatever it was. So that was really exciting.
That's so interesting though, because like medicine now, it's all about go in, like, what's the problem? Give you the tablets to fix it and then you're grand. But like when I'm talking to clients, this is just like crossing over into, I'm like, this is amazing. I didn't know
I've gone
that,
way off track, by the way, with the origin story, but that's what I'm saying. I'd like to make it more interesting.
Yeah, but I didn't know that's what you did before this.
Yeah.
I thought you were like in a lab fucking doing
In a lab, fucking Dexter.
Yeah, I don't know. But you're talking about what you were trying to do there is like figure out what is the root problem and then address the root problem.
Exactly.
And therefore you don't have to like live your life dependent on medication or dependent on, I don't know, treatments and all of these things. And that's what I'm trying to get. Like my coaching, 99% of my clients are weight loss. And we do achieve weight loss. But in the background, the whole mindset thing ticking over is like, why are you leaning on food as a crutch? Why have you got this relationship? And we get to, like, clients now, my clients' lifespan is minimum a year. So more than that. But after all of this work, we get to the root problem of why the fuck are you acting that way, or what's that coming from? And then we start to work on that. It doesn't happen overnight, but you start to work on that area and everything else then fixes itself.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, I think, with medicine now. Obviously, we need medicine and all that. But what you were saying, that's so fascinating. You come and it's like an NCT, looking at all the different parts of your life, what's going on, and addressing that.
Yeah. There's a conversation at the moment, right? It's a heated topic at the moment. You'll go online, you'll see debunkers left, right and centre. You'll see doctors going on talking about influencers going on talking about. So there's an issue at the moment with information curation.
Yes.
So I just want to do a little bit now on my take on this whole thing, because I worked in that industry. I wasn't a doctor. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not medically qualified to give advice. I used to be in the bro science camp of pull yourself up by your bootstraps and go out and run and eat well and you'll be fine. And there's a community for that right now as well, and you can see them online. They have a very specific narrative and they will tell you just do these things and you don't need big medicine, big pharma, all that kind of stuff. I was firmly in that camp.
Okay.
There's still a lot of that rings very, very true. But I also worked with a lot of doctors who are really frustrated because these people are understaffed, underpaid, underappreciated. If they're private doctors, they are running a business, yes, but they genuinely are trying to help people with their training and their scope of practice, and they're dealing with the internet community. Yeah. And there's a lot of issues with the information in the community. In my experience and my opinion, the answer is in the middle.
In the middle.
It's fucking
as it always is, yeah. Exactly. And you just said about the doctors there, I wrote down the word system because as well, I think they're entrapped in a system completely. As well. They have to follow the fucking rules. And the person that popped into my head is Rangan Chatterjee.
Yeah.
He's trying to approach it in a very different way, but a lot of doctors also have to stay within their scope of practice. But you're right, it's hard medicine here. It's, just get out and get shit done here, and it as everything, it's somewhere in the middle.
Completely, and there is a point to all this. It'll link into what we're going to talk about later, but this helped me develop my understanding of humans. And just on your point there are good doctors and there are shit doctors. There's doctors who don't give a fuck. There's doctors who haven't upskilled since they qualified 30 years ago. And there's amazing doctors who are constantly, like one, I'll give you an example. Dr. Gary McGowan. I don't know, do you know Gary? He's part of a company. He's built a company called the Triage Method, and himself and his team are a cohort of health professionals. He's a doctor. There's physios, nutritionists, nutritional therapists. And Gary is very, very mainstream medicine, but very, very lifestyle orientated. So huge focus on health, wellness, quality of relationships, stress management, good nutrition, strength training as a foundation for health, but is also extremely attached to the data and the numbers and the science and the medicine. And he's formally medically trained and he's a doctor, practicing doctor. So he's walking that line between both. And he's an online personality as well. He's got a following online. He's commentating on this. And he rubs so many people up the wrong way on both sides of the fence, because the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. But if you are on Instagram, you have to have a line. You have to have a cell. And your cell has to be carnivore, or it has to be, what's the red glass lady, it has to be extreme. You know what I'm talking about. It has to be an extreme version of the message, or you can't get it out there and break through the noise. And similarly with doctors, they really have to protect the stability of medicine, because people don't trust medicine anymore as much as they did. And they don't trust the government anymore. And they don't trust the news anymore, which there's a lot of justification for. But a lot of doctors working in this system are really good people who are trying to help. So they have to protect the integrity of that system as well. What that means is we just have people shouting at each other all the time.
And when you said that about good and bad shit and stuff, like every profession, like straight away it popped into my head. I was in the teaching industry, right? And like you would have teachers that are like literally like, I would take home like stuff I heard about kids and I'd be like, Mo, like I'm just, like literally take on probably too much, and really, really good teachers. And then you have the lads and the ladies waiting for the pension. And I remember I wrote down here, I wrote, now this isn't like, I'm not judging anybody, but I remember this teacher and I was chatting to him and he was very much just waiting to get out of there and like and not enjoying his job. And I was chatting to him about this document and I was trying to give him resources, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, but how do I get all of that stuff over to that bit? And I was like, you just copy and paste. He's like, Jesus Christ, didn't know you could do that. And I was just like, this man doesn't even know how to turn on a computer. Like, and I'm not judging anyone, but in order to move with the times, you have to change, and we all fear change. We know that, but that just popped into my head there.
But that's funny, because on that, there's also people who've built their entire teaching careers off copy and paste and haven't learned a thing. Do you know what I mean? So the people who all they do is fucking copy and paste. And this is what I'm talking about. Like the answer is somewhere in the middle. Old school approach to teaching where you're actually understanding the stuff and you want it. I'm not saying, I don't know this guy now, but you actually have a bit of a graph for teaching. This guy was obviously just there for the pension, but you do it the old fashioned way and you understand what you're doing. And also modern technology, combine that, nice combination there.
Yeah.
But you just copy and paste your way through life, which a lot of people do nowadays.
Yeah.
Is that right or wrong as well? Like they're just two sides of the same coin, and usually the answer is somewhere in the middle, using the modern tools. And the point of this kind of story, obviously part of my journey was in that clinic there, and I learned a lot about people. And watching him practice medicine, he combined these two worlds of like the data, the numbers, the medical tests, the medical interventions, actual pharmacy, so drugs and stuff like that where they're needed. And that's a very important line for drugs and pills. But also lifestyle medicine and like the stuff we used to talk about, the quality of people's relationships. I say this a lot on podcasts. Owen Lacey said this to me the first time ever, maybe 8 years ago now. And I was asking him about his pillars of health. What does he think is most important? And he said, yes, strength training and nutrition and sleep and stress management and the quality of relationships. And he said, you said it again? The quality of relationships, direct outcome can be tracked between your overall health span, which just to explain for people, lifespan, how long you live, health span, how many of those years are actually lived in a healthy, fulfilling way. That's
what I'm saying to my clients. I'm like, who gives a shit about your lifespan to a certain extent? You don't want to be bloody fucking 90 and not be able to wipe your arse. Do you know what I mean? So I think the switch is health span. Focus on the health. The years, great, as many as we can get. But again, there's no point in living.
You could live to 90 and 40 those years could be terrible.
Could be, absolutely.
If you haven't taken care of yourself. And from 50 on, you could be in pain, you could be overweight, you could have metabolic disease, you could have issues with alcohol, depression, anxiety, all these different things. Or you could live to 75 and get hit by a car, but have had
the best years.
Best years ever. Yeah. So that's health span.
And a reflection, coming back to what you were saying there about quality of relationships, a line that I've said over and over, the quality of your life depends on the quality of your relationships. And it's so true. Yes. Like imagine going into work, hating your fucking boss, hating all of your colleagues, coming home, hating your relationship. Like you're just going to be an a miserable person. Do you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
all of this shit is so uncomfortable. But people, what I think the point you're getting to there is people think the answer to their weight loss problems is just doing this thing. The answer to whatever problem is doing that thing. And it's not. It's addressing all of the things in your life.
Yeah, and I found, to go one layer deeper on that, I think people associate weight loss with being happy. I will be happy when I lose the weight because I'm unhappy with the weight. And this is just an example. There's loads of examples I have from the health sphere, but the weight loss one is easy to understand. And then happiness is what's being sold to us. You will be happy when you lose the weight. But the reason the weight is there in the first place is something deeper.
Mind blown. Is because
It's because
unhappy.
you're unhappy. And anything in my experience from what I've seen, because we worked with a lot of people who were not in a good place and who had addictions and stuff like that. And the common trend seemed to be pain aversion. You reach for something because you're moving away from pain. You reach for the drink or the phone or the food because there's something uncomfortable about the situation you're in right now. So just losing the weight or just having the drink is a if it fucking works. People drink because it works. People eat because it works. It feels good in the moment. But it's not a long-term solution for the original issue. So that lesson I learned, and why I'm hammering this thing about the medicine so much, I learned that lesson in a really practical way by working in this clinic. I saw that real time before I did the personal development bro-dan thing, the growth phase thing. I saw it happening. So later, when I started to develop, I was able to go back and say, fuck.
Makes sense.
These people who were like seriously addicted to pain meds, we saw loads of people with issues with pills or alcohol or like in really abusive relationships or people struggling with metabolic health and liver disease. I'm all of those people. And I was able to call back on that period of my life. So that's why it's kind of relevant. But the big moment, I suppose, the big period of my life that's probably most worth talking about is towards the end of my 20s. All this was going on. I was working in this clinic and it all sounds great when I tell a story in a podcast. Yeah. But I was actually really unfulfilled in the job because I didn't know what my role was. I had kind of gone that way because it was comfortable, because my friend's dad offered me a job. I didn't have to interview. I had no resistance. I had no friction. I walked out of college into a room in a GP's office where I could see clients. Unheard of for a physio. Like, you have to go out and you have to kind of work in clinics and you have to build yourself up and you have to get a client base and stuff. He literally said, I've 1,000 clients. Some of them will need physio. Do you want to come and have a room? And gave me the room. So no resistance for me, which was a problem for me down the road because I didn't have to actually push through that resistance. And then I spent that 10 years in an industry which I learned so much from and which I'm really grateful for now, but completely unfulfilled. And as I mentioned previously, introverted, anxious, no sense of self, still no sense of connection. But on the outside, everyone in the clinic loved me. I was Jack the lad, Dan the man. I played football at a senior level for I was captain for 90% of my career. Everyone thought, oh, the footballer, he's the guy. And on the inside, I wasn't miserable, but I was completely unfulfilled. That all kind of came to a head when I was 29, 30 years of age, and I had...
Dan, what is this? It's like you're speaking my story back to me. I'm like, at 29, I had this breakdown.
I feel like this is a common story, which again, retrospectively, I've gone back. Lots of people go through this at different stages. And like the midlife crisis thing, I think is a version of this. But I basically hit 30, had my first child, and that triggered something in me. It triggered 30 years of unresolved bullshit in my head. No major trauma now, because I know in your life you had some serious, significant traumas and things like that. I didn't have those. Yeah. I lost my hair when I was 11 or 12. So I was bald as a kid. Okay. Some people would look at that and say it was traumatic. Maybe, probably. It made me who I am today, so I'm grateful. Maybe that was an issue. I was really introverted. My dad was... He is my absolute hero. He's a saint, but he did everything for me. So I didn't have any resistance or friction I had to work through because he took care of me. True, pure love. Like, the man is an absolute legend. Yeah. But I had no friction. I cruised through everything. I was smart enough that I cruised through school. I got the first time around, got like 450 in the Leaving Cert. As I said, I didn't try that hard. Second time, blasted through and like got really good results because it was easy for me, not because I worked really hard. So there was never any real friction for me. So I hit 30 and I have a child. Okay. And all of a sudden...
And literally, what is my life?
Boy, child has a baby and life explodes. Yeah. And I spent the guts of 2 years miserable. Like, I don't like using the word depressed because depression's it's a whole nother conversation, but in the absolute darkness for about 2 years. Terrible phase of my life. My partner of now... I have to get this right. How many years? I don't know. It's about 16 or 17 years now. She's not going to listen to the podcast, hopefully. We've been together through all of this the whole time. I don't know how she stuck with me, but during that time, very difficult for her, very difficult for obviously us as parents because it was our first time with a child. And that for me was the catalyst to kind of say, no more. Towards the end of that, there wasn't a specific thing or moment, but towards the end of that, I was able to call on all of the things I'd learned about humans, all of the personal development things, taking care of myself. But mostly I had Jill's support and my parents' support, who basically dragged me out of this misery, I suppose, at that phase of my life. And that was in my early 30s. Horrible period in my life, but learned a load of lessons. And it was essentially me deciding not to be a boy anymore, but needing loads of help to pull through that. Couldn't have done it by myself. And then flick forward to around 2019. And I was really not feeling, I was feeling like this job is coming to there was nothing specifically wrong, but I'm not happy here. Something is going to have to give. So I decided to set up what now is Primal as a little side project to see how it goes. And set up the business, whatever. Didn't have a clue what I was doing, no business experience. And March 2020, COVID. And that was pretty much the catalyst. Loads of people will tell this story. It was probably the best thing that happened to them in their business or whatever, like coaches going online and industries changing and stuff like that. For me, it forced me to make a decision. And the decision was I need to move out of this current environment, which is not serving me at all, and into this completely new thing. Now, I had a new child. And we were trying to buy a house. We were mortgage approved based off the job.
Yeah.
And I was completely terrified because I'd never had to do something this difficult before. Never had to push through this kind of resistance before. And again, my fiance and my parents came to me and said, if you don't do this, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. So made the decision to leave and to go full time as a entrepreneur.
Wow. I'm just like thinking right now, your family are incredible. Just because I'm like, any other person would get so much resistance from that.
Yeah.
And that is the point they turn back.
All the resistance I had was me. This is why I wanted to tell the story this way, like, because it's not some like, I had this intrinsic thing.
Yeah, rags to riches, as you said.
And I fucking said, you know what? No. And you hear all this with like Hormozy and stuff like that. I'm a big fan of all these guys. Big fan, loads of lessons.
Yeah.
But you hear like, I just decided, no, I didn't have that.
You were literally fucking dragged.
I was fucking dragged through because they knew the
potential.
I wasn't maybe the potential, but that I wasn't fulfilled or happy.
Okay.
And they knew that this would serve everybody, me and everybody better by doing this. So I had to make I was the one who had to make the decision, I suppose, but I had the support there to do it. Like I had the safety net, if you want to call it. My fiance, we had a child, we were going to lose our mortgage approval, hadn't got a house yet, still renting, and she said to me, 100% do it. 100, there was no doubt in her head. So that gave me what I needed. So like I say it like this because a lot of the stories you hear, whether the person knows it or not, there's probably an element of support there somewhere. There's probably somebody among all if I didn't tell anybody, this is why I didn't get all the dissent and the pushback. Yeah. If I told people, they would have said, you're fucking crazy. Yeah. I had one friend I said it to and he took a pause and I could tell he was going to go, man, you're fucking 30 and you've a kid. Don't do this. But he took a pause and he said, what do you need?
Wow.
And that's how you know who your friend is. He just said, what do you need? And he helped me kind of build the thing at the start. And that's basically the story. So the point of all of that was I was a boy and it took me until I was 30 to make any sort of decision and I needed help to do that. I learned so much about humans and why we make our decisions and like pain aversion and how that related to my story and then other people's stories through medicine and through watching this whole thing play out with the patients we worked with and how the doctor worked. And I think that most of the decisions and most of the things that we'll talk about in this, if there's any time left after me shouting out, most of the things we'll talk about in this podcast about like doing these difficult things stem back to just human emotion and pain aversion and us making decisions based on how we feel and what we perceive the world to be and what we perceive our story to be. I think all of the fancy entrepreneur stories and rags to riches and businesses, they all stem back to this. Just like all the weight loss stories stem back to this. And I know all the addiction stories stem back to something like this. So, did I finish the story?
Yeah, Dan's live.
Today I run a production studio and again, the final part of the story is the reason I started this business particularly. I run a production studio. We cater for we produce podcasts for people and have a studio here. I wanted to meet more people and hear their stories. That's why I started this business. So now I'm in the position where I get to like meet, I would have met you otherwise. And then all of the guests that you bring in and all the conversations you have, I'm a part of that. So I get to learn more about people and humans and kind of give my 2 cents every now and again. So that's brought us to where we are today.
I love it. It's mad. I didn't know all of those things about you. And I think it's cool to come from that point of view as well. As you said, you didn't have any big things happen in your life or whatever, because I feel sometimes when I have a conversation with someone and I'm here, yeah, this happened to me, like this big fucking dramatic thing, they almost kind of shrink in and be like, oh, well, mine, like I feel stupid talking about my thing now. You know, I was chatting to a coach once and we were having a deep chat and he was like, oh, but like it sounds a bit stupid me saying my problems now because you had to go through this. And I was like, yeah, but their story is relative to them. They don't have any other experience. But I think it's cool to hear from your point of view, like you kind of got given a lot of things and had kind of an easy life. And you got to this point where you were just like, I'm not happy with this. And I think that's where a lot of people get to in life in terms of whether they do have traumatic experiences, whether they don't. And I think everyone has something going on in the background. I don't think anyone gets through this life without a shit happening to them. But they get to a point maybe where, you know, they've listened to a piece of content like my last podcast where they're like, okay, I actually am happy and I wouldn't be fulfilled. Like if you had stayed in that job, you probably wouldn't be fulfilled, you know, if you stay there for the rest of your life. And people realize that, but they don't change then. They don't. It's too uncomfortable. Like I said, like imagine this, like imagine you're in a job for 20 years. You were in that job for 12 years, right? I was in my job for only 7 or 8 years. And you get to this moment of realization that, fuck, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. But you're already 20 years in. You've only, let's say, 10 or 20 years left to the pension and all of these stories that we tell ourselves inside of our head. That's a huge, huge decision to say, right, I'm going to leave. Same way, partner. Like imagine being with someone for 20 years and actually asking yourself the uncomfortable question, am I happy? Realizing, do you know what, I'm not actually happy. What would it take to change? Massive, massive amount of courage. Same place. Like I always think about my sister. She lives in Australia now. And like she would love nothing more to be surrounded by her family. But Ireland just doesn't make her happy. It's not the lifestyle that she wants. So she obviously has the bit of suffering on the other side of her choice. But I just think so many people sit in the okay. Because you said, right, the job that you were in, like you weren't like, it wasn't shit or there wasn't anything going on where you're being bullied or all of this. It was okay. And what I want people to do is, I say it all the time, as morbid as it sounds, try and get to the end of your life in your head and you're sitting on your deathbed and you look back at the timeline of your life. Do you want to say, oh yeah, I had 60 okay years? Like, no.
Yeah.
No, we don't want that. But this is the whole point of this podcast. Is like, what is necessary to change? Well, first of all, it's the fucking acceptance that, like, I think that's so hard to sit down with yourself and be honest and say, shit, I'm not happy here, you know? Because what it takes to change.
Yeah. Huge.
So huge.
Will we go into quotes and stuff now? Because there's a few quotes to pull out here. The region beta paradox, this idea, I'm sure you're familiar with it. Are you familiar with the region beta paradox?
No.
So the region beta paradox is this idea that many of us sit in this grey zone of we're not content or happy, but it's just not bad enough to stimulate us to make a change. So I'll bring this to the medical thing in a second as well, where I learned that lesson. As I said, I constantly pull lessons from dealing with people in health. But the example they use is, if you had to go a mile, you'd walk. If you had to go 2 miles, you'd drive. So weirdly, you'd go 2 miles faster than you would go 1 mile because the distance made you make a different decision and make things a bit easier for yourself. So let me give a more practical example. You're in a job, like I was, that's not bad. It's not great. You're not fulfilled. You're not happy. There's no real positives to it, but it's just not bad enough to make you make a change. If the job was a little bit worse, if you were being bullied or if it was really shit, that would almost be better for your overall situation because it would inspire you to make a change. So that's what they come up with, this idea of the region beta paradox, that we're living in this region beta where weirdly, if our situation was a little bit worse, our entire lives would be better. But all we're doing is trying to make our situation a little bit more bearable. And it's almost worse then, the more resilient you are, the worse you do in these environments because you're able to just take that pain and that abuse constantly. Now, I'm not suggesting everybody's unhappy in their jobs and it's a terrible place. But if you think about, like you mentioned, relationships, think about all these areas of your life, your body, your health, your friendships. in a lot of those cases, you'll find areas that you're like, it's just okay, but I'm not happy, but there's no trigger for me to do anything about it because I'm kind of comfortable here. And comfort is a weird word. I'm not happy here, but there's a comfort in not having to do something that's going to be intrinsically difficult. And where I saw this for the first time, and it blew my mind how often it just repeated itself. It was a heart attack, literally. People would only change their health and their habits when they've literally had a heart attack. So you see someone come out of hospital and they'll say, right, maybe I shouldn't eat McDonald's every single day because I've had a heart attack. But up until the point where they had the heart attack, these are most people are very intelligent and very smart. Everybody understands that they shouldn't have the extra Big Mac or the extra drink. But it's not about understanding on a logical level. It's about feeling something on a deeper emotional level. And until they've had that trigger, it's very hard for us to make any change in our lives until something, the heart attack, I now call it like the emotional heart attack. I needed that emotional, my child coming along obviously gave me the emotional heart attack. And I realized, I need to change so much in my fucking life here because I'm miserable. I haven't learned how to be a man. I'm supposed to be a father for this. All these thoughts going through my head. And that was my moment. And since then is when I hit this trajectory of like personal growth and business owner and all this kind of stuff now. But it was only because I had to hit that level of rock bottom. So I spent the last 5 or 6 years asking people, does everyone need to like go through something like this? I'd like to believe not. I do think we have to go through some difficulty, but I'd like to believe that like someone's listening to this conversation now or has listened to your podcast, Kelly, and has made a change in their life that requires them to not have to hit rock bottom before they start to improve, to get them out of the region beta so they can understand, okay, well, I am sitting in this region beta. I don't need to wait for something terrible to happen. I can actually do this right now because I am in control. And for me, when I saw that with people in health, they'd come in, they'd sit down in front of the doctor, they'd had the heart attack, so they're going to make the change, or if they hadn't had the heart attack, but they looked at him and he said, well, here's 9 things you can do. And they immediately felt empowered and they made a change. He was able to change the trajectory of their lives without waiting for them to have a heart attack. That's what I'm excited about. But that idea, the region beta paradox, is just a great way to visualize it.
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of you saying, do people have to have like something bad happen for them to change? And that's what we're trying to do here, isn't it? These conversations, it's like you don't have to wait until you have the heart attack, or you don't have to wait until you go into your job one day and you literally can't bear it anymore and you tell them to fuck off. Like, you don't have to have that moment. It's all about looking back and just being like, okay, can I make my life, can I do something in the moment right now to improve the way I'm feeling in whatever? That's what I love this conversation, because you're bringing everything into it. You're talking about, health, body composition, jobs, kids, all the areas of your life. And as I said, people, you said it as well, they stay because it's not bad enough. It's okay. And I gave a talk, it was a business talk recently, and I was talking about that. And I was like, being in a job that's okay is actually worse than being in a job that's shit and that you hate, because you are way, way less likely to move. But I think when people listen to our conversations,
Spoofers.
Absolute spoofers. No, but what they start to do, and this, we all do it, don't we?
Yeah.
They start to say, like, if someone's listening to this conversation, they can be inspired, which would be great. But there'll be a lot of people like, oh yeah, but it's easy for you to say, Dan, because your parents helped you.
Yeah.
Your fiance at the time or wife at the time helped you, and like, it's not easier for me. I have 6 kids. I have to do this. I have to do that. Like, what advice would you give there?
I don't give advice, right? So I'm very careful giving advice. Again, it's funny if you asked me this when I was like 28, 29, I was the bootstrap guy.
You were like,
and
get it done.
I wasn't fucking doing it.
Yeah.
This is the funny thing about all this self-help stuff. Just before I touch on that, there's an interesting thing. He's brought it a few times there. One of the biggest things holding a lot of us back from doing anything is this idea of the sunk cost fallacy. We've put so much time and life and energy and effort and money, whatever, into whatever this is, the relationship, the job, the whatever, that we feel like we can't make the change now because we've invested so much in this. This is who we are, and we're stuck. And the reason it's called a fallacy, that's literally just a story
you're telling yourself.
Ourselves. Yeah. But it's an interesting one. I like these quotes sometimes because they help me remember, or a lot of the podcasts I listen to, you'd hear something like this. Most of it washes over me, but every now and again there's a phrase like that.
That sticks. I'm the same.
Yeah.
Like the quote. Quote King.
Chris Williamson, the quote king. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and that's where I got a lot of this stuff as well. But yeah, that idea of the sunk cost fallacy just helps me remember that even though, like, even this business, there'll come a point where with this business where I'll have to decide, and to decide I'll have to have some sort of awareness around it. Am I happy doing this still? Is it still fulfilling me and doing what I said I wanted to do? And if it's not, am I okay just letting that go and doing something else? Because most people will say, you're fucking insane. You can't leave the job. You've spent all this time, all this money. But that's a fallacy. It's a story we tell ourselves. Yes, a lot of people aren't in a position to just up and leave their job or change their business or whatever like that. I fully accept that. And the person I often say this with medicine as well, like the bootstrap dam was like, just get out and go for a walk in the morning and do your journaling and do your breath work and then go get a session in and eat well. And then there's some poor young mother, single mother with 6 kids, two children have issues with their health or their psychology, and she's by herself and she's working 3 jobs. Where's she going to go and fucking get a grass-fed steak and do her kettlebell workout? Like, she's fucking not. But I do believe that all of us have the ability to make decisions. And for me, my decisions are very privileged. And for most people that I meet, our decisions are very privileged because we have loads of decisions we can or can't make. There's not a lot of huge amount of pressure on us. There's the usual stresses we all talk about, like, oh, I've got to pay the mortgage and we got to get a nicer shoes for Jason, or we got to go on a holiday or whatever. Like, that's not real stress, but it is what we interpret as stress. That's fine. Not judging that. But I do believe most of us have the ability to make decisions multiple times throughout a day, and we can make slightly better decisions, or decisions that are a little bit more in line with who we want to be once we figure that out. But I've completely lost track of the question you asked me originally before I went off track.
Yeah, no, you answered it there in terms of, that's what I would say as well, because I know there's people out there like, oh, look, it was easy for Kellie, it was easy for Dan. And in certain aspects, it absolutely was. Like, I had no kids when I made that jump. Like, I think that is a massive thing. Whereas actually, it's funny looking at you, that's what caused you to make the jump, is the kid. Whereas I had no kids. So I was like, okay, maybe if I did have kids, I wouldn't have left teaching as soon. And I cut ties. I mean, the same with COVID. COVID happened. It was March. I was still teaching. So we were teaching at home at the time from the schools. And I started to take clients on kind of after hours, because I had more time available to me. I wasn't traveling to 3 hours a day. And that's how I kind of dipped the toe in, was like, okay. And then the summer came, bang, rang the principal, not coming back. But that's not what I'd advise for other people. Do you know what I mean? So someone who's listening to this like, oh, well, it was easy for you. You had X, Y, and Z. And we all have versions of that when we look at other people. Isn't it easier for them? And really, if we were to take everything into consideration, we don't know their backstory. It's probably not. But what I would say to people who listened to my last podcast or is listening to this podcast and have realized, shit, this isn't where I want to be. I'm in a job that's okay. Or even on the other end of the spectrum, again, a working mother or father who has kids, had no other option, working 2 jobs. Even if they realize, okay, shit, this is not where I want to be. There are, as you said, that's exactly the advice I would give. There are small choices that you can make on a daily basis that will course correct you into the direction that you want to be or you want to get to. And that's the start after the awareness part.
Yeah. So here's my question for you, right?
Okay, go for it.
How do we figure out what is supposed to make us happy? How do we know? How do we know that this job isn't for us or this relationship for us?
Okay. I heard this recently and I think this is great. Because we all are surrounded by online world now, find your passion, do your passion and all this bullshit, right? Well, some of it is. It's hard to know what you want to do. And I think a lot of people can feel a massive pressure. I don't know what I want to do. I don't have my purpose. I don't know what my passion is, right? And that's fine. But I think you know what you don't want to do. And I think that's the place to start.
Okay.
So ask yourself what you're doing right now. Is this what I want to do? No. Okay, fine. Go and I'm not saying try different jobs. Obviously, we can't fucking dip in and out of jobs.
Today, heart surgery.
Tomorrow. But ask yourself, what is it that you don't want to do? And avoid that.
What should we be feeling when we're doing something we don't want to do? And the reason I'm pressing on this is because there's a phrase we're circling around here, which is happiness.
Yeah.
And everyone is looking to be happy. But are we looking to be happy? Because I find and have found that trying to be happy places an expectation on the external. So I will be happy when immediately disempowers you. If you know anything about me or my podcast or anything that I do, the word empowerment is the core of everything. I felt empowered by the people who helped me and the content and podcasts I had access to. All this information empowered me. I was able to make a better decision. And then in the medical setting, I watched the doctor empower our clients by giving them information, things that they could do. And they were like, I'm going to change my life now. And they were empowered. He didn't do it for them. He empowered them. So a lot of the time with the idea of happiness, there's two elements to what I'm about to say here. One is the obvious that everybody knows, is that we're being sold this idea of happiness. So you will be happy when you have a new BMW. You will be happy when you have a bigger house. You will be happy when you have the same thing or more than everybody else in your environment has. And in one small way, that's not 100% a negative thing, because it forces growth and innovation and people to work hard and all that kind of stuff. However, if we're looking for happiness in all those different comparative external sources, we're never going to find it. That's. I know it's a cliche, but like still haven't heard one person who said that all of their things made them happier. And these are people who have the thing. I know lots of people who have the things. I don't have all the things, so I'm not standing here saying the things don't make you happy.
Yeah.
Money don't make you happy. Money don't make you happy. It doesn't make you happy. I'm not standing here saying that, but I've met so too many people for me to ignore the message that that's not it. And they have all of the things and multiples of the things: the monies, the houses, the jobs, the notoriety, the fame, whatever. And it's apparently not it. So chasing happiness is dangerous. If I leave this job and start this business, I'm going to be happy. I know just by looking at you, and you know by looking at me, that there's most days in this business, I'm the furthest thing from what I would describe as traditionally happy. Like, I'm fucking getting things done, but I'm filled with purpose, and I'm content that I make decisions about my life. And that's for me, that's good, because I didn't have that in the last job. And then I can go home in the evening and I can be proud of what I did that day a lot of the time. But happiness, this state of bliss and joy and like dancing with rainbows and I'm an entrepreneur, that's not what this is at all. So I'm just careful with happiness. I'm interested to see how you frame this idea for yourself of like, what are we chasing here when we change jobs or start a business or like go earn the money? What is that?
I love this. I absolutely love this. I could talk about this all day. I've literally written.
I just wrote.
I mean, I didn't get an A in English or anything, but so I think that you can't be happy if you seek happiness, as you said. So people are like, I want to be happy. I'm going to chase this happiness. But happiness is in the moment. And let me try and decipher this, right? So I'll be happy when, right? So there is a contract to that person's happiness. There is a desire that they want. And a quote, you said you love quotes. I think there's a quote that summarizes everything. Desire is a contract you make with yourself to be unhappy until you get the thing that you want.
Is that Naval?
Yes.
I have two more Naval quotes in here.
But this is the thing that people need to realize, because they can disprove this their own thoughts right now, okay? And it's by thinking back to the last thing that you based your happiness on. What did you think? Everyone listening to this, think about the last time you said, I'll be happy when. I'll be happy when I find a partner, move job, buy the house, whatever. And are you now happy forever? And that's it. You're now happy? No, because happiness is fleeting. You get the thing that you said would make you happy. Oh, Jesus, what Christ. I was happy for a day, 2 days, and now I want the next thing. Happiness isn't, you will never find happiness in seeking happiness. The only way to truly be happy, and this is what I have come to believe only in probably the last year, is realizing that happiness is in the everyday. Because when you look back on your life, when you're at the end of it, you'll realize that your life was made up of this everyday thing. It wasn't the big milestones that you put your happiness off until you reached, you know? I think so much of us think that happiness is on the other side of achievement. It's not. Happiness has always been an inside job. Happiness has been there all along. And even in the circumstance of the mother who's struggling with the kids, who is in a job that she doesn't like, I am not telling her not to want better things and not to work towards better things and not to make better decisions in the moment. But there is always a source of happiness in our everyday life. And these are the things that we need to focus on. I think that happiness is in not wanting stuff and trying to focus on little bits of everyday happiness and just constantly doing that. So like for me, and again, I can say this from a place of privilege because I'm not struggling financially. I'm not struggling, in areas that some people do struggle in. But if you look at my life, Dan, if people could actually get a snapshot of my everyday real life, they wouldn't even believe how simplistic it is. You know what I mean? Apart from the podcast and stuff and, recently flying off to events. I'm not talking about those big things. Yes, amazing that I get to do those. But my everyday life, like we said before this, you looked at your kid's little sock and you nearly cried with happiness. You know what I mean?
Telling people you destroy my fucking image here.
I told you I'm letting out all the secrets. But like the other day I was walking and I saw these, conkers. What sycamore? Is that? Anyway.
Chestnut.
Chestnut tree. And I just crouched down and one was like open and one was like half open and one was closed. And I was just like borderline tears at how beautiful this is. Like life right in front of me. And people can look at me and be like, she's a fucking sap. I don't care. You're probably the person who's putting off your happiness till you get the next massive big thing. But then you've missed all of the in-between. And the awakening moment for me to realise this was the moment, and I said it on the last podcast, was me and Mo were living in this house, right? Renting this house. I was still teaching. We got granted planning permission. Huge thing in Wicklow because they nearly ask you to fucking give a sample of blood for it. You know what I mean? We got planning, super excited. And then I was just thinking, that's it. Now we build the house and we can start living. We can have the family. We can be happy. And I just caught myself in the moment. And I had realised that I had done that my whole life, had put my happiness off till the next thing. And it's like I've mentioned it on the podcast so many times. It's a list. I'd put my happiness off until I got the good leaving cert, because I repeated my leaving cert as well. Many things that you spoke about earlier, like really mirror my life, like moments as well. Happy when I got the job, all of these different things. And when I said that to myself and I had this conversation with Mo in the moment, I was like, fuck Mo, I've just realised I've done this my whole life, putting my happiness off until, and I kind of mourned those 20 years because I could have actually been happy with what I had while working for the things. So in that moment I said, fuck it, Mo. Let's not build right now. And let's, have the kids and focus on what's in front of us. And that's what we did, financially. I said it on the last podcast, we would have been under quite a bit of pressure in terms of paying a mortgage at that time. Like I was teaching, but it was like a shitty wage. I was only starting out. Mo, again, wasn't raking in the money or anything like that. So it would have been a financial pressure for us to pay the mortgage, for us to try and start having kids, because we had to pay for, all this. So I said, we just fucking go for the kids now, put the house off till later and just be happy now. I'll never forget it. And now it's funny because it's like a full circle moment. Now we're in the middle of our house being built and we can enjoy the process of the house and not be under any financial strain. We still will have a mortgage. Do you get where I'm coming from?
Oh, I completely get where you're coming from, yeah. And it's so interesting to me, again, why I love doing this. I recently had a conversation with Kadam Adam Starr, who is a Buddhist meditation teacher. He's on a podcast, right? And I've done 2 episodes with him, and both of them are probably 2 of my favorite episodes ever. I asked him the same question, like what is happiness? And in the Buddhism, I'm going to butcher this now, but in Buddhism, they have this idea of the golden nugget, which is happiness, it's always in there. And it's just covered in layers of mud. And the mud is distraction, materialism, the modern world, all these different things. Your trauma, your experiences, your behaviors, your life. It's buried in there, but it's always in there. And I was asking him, what is happiness? And he's such a beautiful teacher, because he helped me find the answer myself. He just kept me talking until I found the answer myself. And he was asking me about thinking about the last time I was with my children and how did I feel. And I was like, I feel this like warmth and almost like I want to cry. And it's just, and he's like, where is it? Is it in here? And he's like, so you were just happy right there. Nothing changed in this room. You didn't actually see your kid. Nothing happened. You just reached inside and acknowledged and looked at that golden nugget and peeled back another layer of mud, and it's in there. And they have this, like you mentioned, materialism there is where a lot of us get distracted today. This thing I need to... it's funny because I often think about this. It's linked with our survival instinct, because we think if we have the nice BMW, I'll speak as a man, right? Because men and women are different, believe it or not. But I'll speak as a man because that's the only place I can speak from any sort of authority. If I have this car, people will respect me. If people respect me, they'll accept me. If they accept me, that's a form of love. I want to feel loved by having this car. And the advertising company is confirming that for me. They're telling me. And then all my friends are in the same trap as me. So they're all getting the car. So not only do I feel like I need this love and it's being validated because they all are doing the same thing, I'm also now comparing myself. So now I feel less than, which for me as a man is a crippling fear. It's one of the biggest lessons I've learned over my years is I feel less than for some reason. And I'm constantly, that's being reinforced for me because I don't have all these things that are supposed to make me a man. So all of these things lead to layer up that mud on top of what it's right there for me. It's happiness. It's those moments. Sometimes I'm just sitting there and I'm looking at my kids and I'm crying and nothing has changed. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? I have everything right here. They're right here in front of me. And I'm sitting thinking about the BMW because my mates have the BMW and the business isn't making enough money. And geez, I have to do this and I'm crippled with it. Crippled. And I'm right there with my kids. I'm ignoring the happiness and I'm layering more mud on because I'm being distracted. So I have real compassion and empathy. And like Adam was really able to, like, I'm not just trying to plug the podcast here. Go and listen to some of him speaking on podcasts and stuff like that. It's just beautiful how gentle he is with this. Because sometimes like we're like, the fucking God, just be fucking happy. Just stop looking for the shit and go and be happy. And he's just so gentle. He just lets you kind of come to the realization that it's in there. And it's had a really profound impact on me in terms of how I try and frame this happiness question all the time. Because like when you ask people, you get great answers. Like you've just given me a fantastic answer there. But for some people, it's really hard in their lives to apply what you've just said.
Yeah.
And for me and you, it's so fucking easy because we're sitting here on a Tuesday, like chilling, drinking tea,
but
looking
Dan,
back.
we're on the other side of those tough decisions.
I think, to be honest with you, to push back a little bit against that, we're still right where everybody else is. I think we just have a little bit more visibility on it because we are privileged enough to be able to have these conversations and bounce it off each other. Like, because I'm looking at you and there's bits twigging when you're speaking and you're looking at me and you're going, fuck, and you're writing bits down. And we get to do this. And in our jobs and what we decide to do for business, we get to work with people that we surround ourselves with and we get to constantly be inspired by people and we have an awareness around it now. But like, later on, there's going to be a tough decision for you. Tomorrow, there's going to be a tough decision for you. In a year's time, something's going to happen in your life that's going to be traumatic and difficult to deal with, and you're going to have to make a decision. And you're going to have to keep making these decisions. You're going to go to one of these events, and someone's going to be there who's doing better than you in business, and who has more followers than you, and is making more money than you, and looks happier. And this is going to keep happening to you. So I don't think we're past it, but I do think we're lucky enough to start to have this awareness that we can work on. Adam explained to me, like, I'm a little bit deeper through the layers of mud now. It's still fucking completely covered up. Because most of the time, I'm not sitting in my contentedness and state of peace. Most of the time, I'm not. I'm fucking completely distracted. So I want to be really clear with people. Like, I'm always conscious, like, going on podcasts and stuff like this. I don't think there's a right or wrong way of doing this. I don't think there is a happiness for everybody. I think it's this sense of peace and contentedness and connection and compassion and all. This sounds really airy-fairy now, but it is inside and it's available for everybody. But the thickness of those layers of mud, to describe it in Adam's way, is different for everybody. And everyone's environment is different. Like, our environments now are really conducive to this. We're literally in a soundproofed room in a complete echo chamber, just high-fiving each other about all these great things that we're talking about and doing. Whereas somebody's now out sweeping the streets in the pissings of rain, with 5 kids at home, and a mortgage and loads of bills and shit like that. And that's not the same thing. They don't have the same opportunity as I do to like sit with this. But it's why I love doing this, because he might be listening to the podcast. And as he's listening to the podcast, it might spark something in him. And then he might go ask a question. And that, as you said, that might course correct him. And he might start to realize, yeah, I can be a street sweeper for the rest of my life. There's nothing wrong with that job. But now I can have a sense of purpose and I can be happy. And I don't have to compare myself to the bus driver or the guy in the BMW or whatever. I can just be happy right here. And I can go home and sit with my kids. And yeah, maybe my house is bigger or smaller than the neighbours, but it's completely fucking irrelevant because it's in here. Nothing that he can do or say or how he feels has anything to do or any sort of impact on how I feel. So like listening to Adam just like gently walk me through everything I already knew, because I'm a human being. You come out going, oh, fucking Jesus Christ. But I'm lucky enough to do this over and over and over and over again.
But that's what you were saying there about how you got to the answer yourself. That's exactly what happened to me when I went to therapy, right? I sat down with this woman and I was like, can you please stop all this madness in my head? Fix me. And she was like, okay. So basically I went to her for years and years and I came out a different person. But people were like, what did you get? Like on podcasts I was asked before, like, how did it help? And what did you get from it? And all. And to be honest with you, I just kept on talking and she just kept on pointing me direct, like subtly, really subtly in the right way. And I connected all the dots. Like when I look back, I'm like, oh, I made the connections and I figured all this stuff out because I was talking about it and I came to that myself. But it is good to have like a facilitator that will lead you in the right direction. And you mentioned there about us not being out the other side of this. And I totally agree. Like I'm the first person to say that. Like I will spend the rest of my life trying to answer all these questions and understand myself and understand life and all of these different things. And you mentioned there about a street sweeper and they can do that for the rest of their lives. And change, I suppose, let's say from now, being so miserable and hating their job and, you know, wishing for a different life. Or they can, I'm not saying like, again, they mightn't have the opportunity and everything, but they can change the way they look at that. Yeah. And I'm still not saying, no, so listen to this, right? I'm still not saying they have to love their job or anything like that. But I think they can change their expectation. And a lot of people like, you don't have to be in an amazing job. Great if you are. And I think we're kind of contradicting ourselves here because I'm like, if you're in an okay job, try and move towards a better one. And I would always say that to people, isn't that better than not trying to move? Absolutely. But also there's an expectation there that you have to be aware that, you know, for a lot of the time, you're not supposed to love your job or love everything. Like for us, we come in and there's decisions to be made and clients might be causing like stress, and it's not that we sit here and we love our job all of the time, but we are trying to be better and we are aware of expectations. What does it come back to? I'm talking around myself here, but what does it come back to? That word all of the time is awareness.
Yeah.
And that's the conversation we had last time I was in here, talking about awareness and how we're so grateful that we've got to this point of being aware of, you know, what we want, what is necessary to progress, what is necessary for us to be happy. And what you just asked me, personally, like what you were saying about that Buddhist guy, I believe that it's inside all of it all along. But that doesn't mean, Dan, that I am now happy forever.
No.
Like you said, I'm constantly trying to peel back all of those layers that are on top of my happiness that pull me, so distract me from actually what's important. Because I know what's important to me. You know what's important to you. And it's, for me, it's my kids. For you, it seems like the same thing. But we get so distracted with all of the shit that's going on in the world. So my message is always to people, try and pull yourself back. And I say this to clients with like scrolling on their phone, binge eating, all of these things. I'm like, that action in the moment isn't the problem. You know, it's not a problem. It's just a reaction to something that's happened. That's fine. But it's your inability to pull yourself back to baseline, to pull yourself back to that question of what actually makes me happy. Because we have comparison to fucking neighbours over here. We've comparison to our colleagues over here. We've comparison on social media on here. We're surrounded by it. The day and age we're in now, that's what we're surrounded by, is comparison. Stories by society, stories in school growing up, stories, this, that and the other. It's so hard to pull yourself out of that.
Yeah. Are we doing okay on time? Because I'm really enjoying this.
No, yeah, we're good.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Can we keep going?
Yeah.
Deadly. Okay. I'm going to, something else I learned with Adam as well, this word practice. So the Buddhist kind of philosophy, there's a huge focus on meditation. There's a huge focus on sitting with yourself. We're going to talk about Naval as well. Naval Ravikant is, I suppose, he's an angel investor. People might be familiar with him. He doesn't do a lot of media. He did this massive episode on Joe Rogan once, and people are like, who the hell is this guy? But he's a guy who is wealthy beyond our wildest dreams, but is extremely grounded in the spiritual world. He has a rigorous meditation practice, and his idea is to clear the inbox. His idea, like the Buddhist idea, is to clear all that mud and sit with happiness. He has all the money and says it doesn't make you happy. However, he does say that not having money can make you really unhappy. So having like the newest house and the clothes and the cars, they're not going to make you happy. But if you're miserable, under pressure, working 20 hours a day, not healthy, you don't feel good in yourself, you body's not the way it wants, they can make you really, really unhappy. So maybe to point a little bit closer to what both of us are saying around the actions you can take, they're not to move you towards happiness. They're maybe to move you away from unhappiness. And actually, this is probably the first time I thought about this. When I was struggling, remember I said I didn't know exactly what it was? It was just a bunch of small actions that made me less unhappy with the things I could control. So I started to get back on top of my training, back on top of my food, back on top of my trying to be a better partner for Jill, trying to be a better father for Zoe, and not being as unhappy in those areas of my life pulled me slowly back to center. And the reason I like why you mentioned center, this idea of practice. I don't believe there is a state that any human being reaches where they are completely enlightened. But I do believe they get better and better and better at managing the chaos of their environment, so all of the inputs, and being able to center themselves much quicker. So you've heard him, I've heard you mention him before. He talks about this space between the input and the response. Stoicism, the exact same thing. Something happens to you and you immediately react. You're reactive. Something happens to you. You create some sort of space between the thing that's happened and your response, and you decide what you want your response to be. Easier said than done, believe me. Nine times out of 10 I fail at this, but the idea is you want to be someone who practices creating that space for yourself, seeing the stimulus come in, which you can't control. You cannot control that. Again, it's another parable. I love these ancient parables. The difference between suffering and pain. Pain as a human is inevitable.
It's inevitable.
Suffering is optional. So it sounds a bit patronizing to people who might be suffering at the moment. However, I think the point of it is, where I like to think about it, is the thing that's going to happen to you can't control.
It's going to happen.
It's going to happen no matter what. Most things in your life are going to happen no matter what you do. But how you respond to that situation is what's going to define who you are, and how, quote unquote, for the cameras, happy you are. Can you experience this thing that's a negative thing or a positive thing or an anything thing, create a bit of distance between yourself, and then live your life anyway? Can you decide you can feel the anger. The anger comes in. I get angry sometimes. The anger comes in. Can I separate myself from the anger? Just allow the anger to happen and then go, I'm going to just make this decision that's completely separated from the anger. And being able to create that space comes from having a practice, which is why meditation is called a practice. Now, I'm a terrible practitioner of meditation. I almost never do it. But I have other things in my life that give me that space to separate myself from the emotions of the world. And when things happen, I'm getting better and better and better now at having that bit of space, because I've trained it. I describe myself as a baby who's just cracking their eye open, and I'm just starting to see things. And for the rest of my life, I'm going to be learning how to do this. But even that little bit, I think, is what we're touching on. We touched on it earlier, is what we are developing now. And because we've seen it, we can never unsee it. It's so awful and painful on one hand, because now you realize how full of shit you are.
Yeah.
But also it's so empowering and liberating, because you also realize I might be full of shit, but now I can take actions to change that. My boss doesn't control who I am. He doesn't control how I respond and react. He doesn't control how I interact with my kids. But if my boss says something to me that pisses me off and I go home and I have a go at my kids, my boss does control. So I've outsourced my power. I've completely disempowered myself. This idea, I know people are maybe familiar with the idea, but for me, it is everything. I can train myself to be better at creating space between the inputs of the world and myself. And by doing that, I tend to feel calmer. I tend to take more time and look inwards. I tend to be able to recognize the golden nugget a bit more and peeling back those layers. And all of this is what I've been taught by having conversations like this with people like Adam, people like yourself. But it is the thing for me.
I actually am just nodding here, because I had that moment of realization as well. I was like, oh my God, I've spent the last X amount of my years just reacting to what happened to me. And just to clarify for people, when something happens, again, you can't control it. You always have an option. And you either react, which is respond, like you just go straight away, or else you respond. And the difference with the response is that you said you give yourself time. And I learned that through therapy, and it has changed my life, because I was always a very reactive person. I was always very hot-headed, really not mental.
I'm still reactive, by the way. I just want to clarify this. I'm still reactive.
Absolutely. But we are practicing, right? Something's happened and you're like, but you give yourself a minute and you don't send back the text, or you don't blah, blah, blah. And that's what I do. So now I'm like, most of the times, I'm like, right, I will see how honestly, I will see how I feel after I've slept on that. And if it's still like, I want to rip their head off, I'll rip
I'm
their
fucking
head
with her.
off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But it's not that immediate reaction because
yeah.
that's usually like, think about all the times you've reacted to something straight away and you think back and you're like, fuck, I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
And now it's just giving yourself that little bit of space to calm down. And then if you still want to do that, do that. And that's what I'm trying to do now. I'm trying to be less from Dan. Actually, this is a very important point that I've realized. I'm trying to be less emotional from a positive and a negative point of view. And what I mean by that is I'm trying not to get too low on the bad days, but I'm also trying not to get too high in the good days, because what I used to find was that when I've a really good day or I've achieved something or I've done an Ironman, I'd get fucking super happy, which is great. But I'd also have a really bad come down on the opposite side of it. You know, you go below baseline.
Gold medal syndrome.
Gold medal syndrome. So I'm trying to just live my life now a little bit more balanced in the middle. Not getting too mad, happy about things and putting all my hopes and dreams on things. Also not getting too dramatic, I suppose, because I used to think I couldn't separate my thoughts right now from the future and realizing they won't be like that forever. So I say this to Mo, like, but what I used to be like is, you know, we argue, everybody argues, surprise, surprise. But when we used to have an argument, I used to be like, I cannot function until this argument is fixed. Sit down now, have this conversation because I can't go to work, all this mad shit. And now it's funny because if we have a small argument or whatever, I find myself sitting with this uncomfortable feeling. And because again, we're not perfect, but what we're doing is trying to be better and remind ourselves. I constantly be like, okay, I feel real angry now or I feel uncomfortable. And I'm like, Kellie, you tell yourself these are the feelings that you have to sit through to get to the other side. And I almost not laugh about it and have a laugh because I'm still angry. Like, we're not saying you're never going to get angry. You're never going to...
I blew up the weekend there for
Like-
something stupid. I lost the head completely. And so 100% does happen.
This all happened, but you're aware, Dan. Like, honestly, everything comes back to that thing. I mean, you said there about you feel like you're just opening your eyes to this now. You're slightly, you know, just maybe a bit more ahead than you were and realizing all of these things. I feel the same. Like, I don't come on here and in any way try to be a professional about this and I'm fixed and I'm all of these things. But what I am trying to highlight for people is that there is another way.
Yeah.
You don't have to be miserable all the time. And you asked me a question and then you kind of answered your own question a second ago by you saying that you realized what didn't make you happy in your, let's say, as a father, in your career, in your relationship, and you try to be a little bit better for your wife, for your kids, for yourself. So kind of a full circle. People will be listening to this and I know they listen to episodes and it's like, but what do I do? How do I get to this place? And it's just by thinking about what are the things that don't make you happy and try and make a tiny, as insignificant as it might seem in the moment, tiny change now, but it eventually over time, all these tiny little decision changes that you make actually lead you to a completely different place.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a question for you and then I have a thing I'd like to say as well.
Right.
Surprise, I have a thing I'd like to say. You mentioned there the emotions, try not to get too high and try not to get too low. I've started to kind of learn about my emotions. And when I listen to people talk like we're talking here now, I can get very frustrated sometimes because they're like, I just control the anger a bit better. I try not to get so angry all the time or whatever it is. And I don't actually think that's possible. So I think you're still going to have the really high highs and the really low lows. But the story you tell yourself about what that means in your life is shifting a little bit. So I can still get really angry or really happy. And I don't necessarily want to not do that because it's a human experience. Like being really happy or being really low. Like being really low highlights how fucking happy I am when I'm really happy. Without it, like my granddad used to say, if every day was a holiday, then if every day was a holiday, then the play would be as tedious as the toil. So essentially, if everything was like neutral and baseline and we had no variation, it'd be boring as fuck.
You have to have sadness to have happiness.
You have to have sadness to have happiness, yeah. But I think the story I tell myself, probably Adam again taught me this the other day. I was like, sometimes I get angry at my kids because they're doing something. And then I get really guilty and ashamed of myself for getting angry at my kids. And he was saying, well, that's just a story you're telling yourself about who you are in that moment. You are now an angry person and a bad father. That's what I have told myself, which is why I feel the guilt. But he was saying to me, if you can just feel the anger, because it's a human emotion, and then get better at not immediately reacting or responding, or when you do react or respond in a way you don't like, just acknowledge that that was just something you didn't like, and just put that in the little file of facts of, I didn't like that thing that I did. I don't want to be that person, and develop this idea of the person you want to be. Because most of us don't know what that is. And if we don't know what that is, we're led by the outside. I need to be this type of person or that type of person. I need to wear that suit. So if you can just acknowledge, I am a human being and I got angry and I did this thing I didn't like with my kids. I raised my voice at my kids. Don't be guilty about it. Have a little bit of compassion for yourself. It's not an excuse, but you're using that as a teaching experience for yourself. And then the next time you'll recognize the situation and you can give yourself a bit of space. And I was like, that's a real practical way of looking at it, because a lot of this stuff is so fucking
It's so up in
abstract.
the air and tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Practical.
Just be more at one with yourself. What's the
Tell me.
behavior? What's the fucking thing I can do?
But Dan, I totally agree. You were saying there, it's not that I don't get angry now. And I totally agree. It's like I still, when something happens, I'm like, for fuck's sake, you get angry. But as you said, it's giving yourself that little bit of space to be like, don't react straight away. And then also just use it as a learning experience. When I heard that first, I was like, oh yeah, for fuck's sake, easy for you to say. But honestly, every single thing that goes on in your life that, isn't ideal, there's always something to learn from it because of the story that you're telling yourself about it. And I couldn't agree more with you.
Yeah. It's absolutely massive. And learning this stuff and applying this stuff are two different things. So like, again, this idea of self-compassion, I think self-compassion or compassion is a deeper level to this awareness, because when you start to generate awareness, you're aware that you're just a human. So you're a little bit more compassionate. And like, this is how I know I'm on like level 2 of the million level game. I was driving the other day and like, you said you're reactive. I can be really reactive, but I'm getting better now at not acting on it. So that's the difference. But someone cuts me up in traffic, or does it, like, the worst thing is someone in the outside lane going to the third exit on the roundabout. You don't know how to use a roundabout. They cut me off, and then I don't mind the cutting off if everyone makes mistakes. If they turn and look at me and shake their head, I'll pull the handbrake, spin her around and head off down the road after you. And someone did that to me today, laid on the horn and give me all this out the window. And it was so weird because this never happens to me. This sounds like I'm some sort of like this calm being. I was like, I wonder what's going on in your man's day there. Like, he just lost a fucking head there over like, yeah, okay, but we didn't crash. Nothing happened. Usually it'd be the other way around and I'd be losing the head trying to climb out the car to go after them. And that's, for me, I was like, that's a new thing that's happening to my brain now, because I have a little bit of, thanks to the teachings of other people, have a little bit more compassion for myself. I now recognize that that's in other people. And I don't know what audience this podcast goes out to, but psychedelics actually were a huge tool to help me really recognize that.
Stop.
Really recognize that. Now, I'm not massively experienced in anything like that, but I've had several experiences in both the medical world and in the more ceremonial kind of spaces with psilocybin and substances like this. And one of the big learnings you get from tools like this, depending on how they're used, is compassion and connection with other people, and a realization that Kellie is just another version of me. She's the same fucking thing. Same thing.
I love it. The same.
We are literally the same thing.
But in that day, she's having that experience.
And I know what that's like because I have that experience all the time.
Absolutely.
And because of that, I can now look at you being an absolute weapon to me out on the roads, and I can go, if that's just a version of me, she is probably having a mare today. Or someone said, oh, she's really upset. Or maybe she's had a breakup. Or she's lost her job. Or someone's really sick in her life. It's weird what your brain does, because this is not a really conscious thing for me. I'll be like, I'm going to kill this guy.
Yeah.
I'm going to hunt him down, burn his house down, and see how he fucking cuts me off now.
Yeah.
But there was something that day that went, I wonder what's going on in that fella's life. And it just carried on. And it was such a sense of peace for me. It was like, turned the radio off and just cruised into work on a cloud. Like, that was really weird. But that has started to happen now that I'm doing these practices.
I was going to say, Dan, that wouldn't have happened a year ago because you hadn't had shown up and done those little things over time. And I think, and we're all guilty of this. When we hear someone speak, like let's say someone's listening to this now and they're like, wow, I'd love to get to that point. We want it straight away. And that's the problem. That's the problem with fucking society, is this instant dopamine hit. You want to change, you want it straight away. You're not willing to do the work. And that moment of clarity that you got and peace you got for not reacting to that man was an accumulation of all the decisions that you've made over, a long period of time. And I wrote down the word compassion there before you said that, because I think it was
No, you didn't write it down after.
Mo Gauda.
I fucking saw you. I saw you.
Mo Gauda said on it, he was like, if you can try and approach people with compassion instead of judgment, you will change your life. Because, Dan, that man who cut you off could have ruined your day. But he didn't, because you didn't allow him to ruin your day. And I'm not saying, because you said it there, which really struck me as well, it's not an excuse. You know, I'm not saying give people free rein to do what they want in your life. But if you allow other people's actions to determine your peace of mind, you're screwed, because you're just reacting to the world and every single thing in it. Whereas if you tell yourself a different story, okay, that lad could have got a call from his wife who's after whatever and rushing home. And I do that as well, because when you were talking about, honestly, this is terrible, I probably even shouldn't say it, but I used to be so bad in traffic as well. Someone cut me off in the Lockingstown roundabout. Followed them. I followed them. I was about 18 years of age.
What are you going to do?
Up the back roads of, what's that place called? Michael's or something. And it was, anyway, ended up being this American couple in a car. And I was like, for fuck's sake, you could have. Now, it was pretty bad. But now I think I would have a different response. Maybe I would have been like, right? But I wouldn't have followed them up the road. I wouldn't
The funny thing is, after that experience, that day at work, I went home and that was the day I had a blow up with you. Lost fucking head over something stupid. Like, so this is what I'm saying. It's not, again, you listen to a lot of these people on podcasts, you're like, I did this video the other day on Instagram called the Gogginism. So I use these things very sparingly. You look at someone like Goggins and you try and apply that advice to your life and you're like, this is so fucking fair. I can run 100 miles before work and like go do the Moab 250 and all this mad shit. But it's not the point. The point is the human beings are capable of doing incredible things and you can apply some of that to your life. I call it a Gogginism. Take a little bit of Goggins and apply it to the bits of life where it's relevant. It's the same thing with this. You're listening to two people talking on a podcast. You're like, this is so fucking unrelatable. They're either bullshitting or they don't know what my life is like at all. My life is very, very normal. This has not happened. I just said that was it was a one time. I noticed it because it's like so rare.
Because it was so rare, yeah.
Most of the time I'm a fucking raging lunatic. Someone cuts me off. I'm like you. I'll follow them home. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is if you're listening to something like this or this conversation, you can just take this and store it away. And at some point that might be useful to you when you're ready. There'll be a point in your life where you have a decision to make. You'll recognize the decision, which is the big part of it. And then you'll have something you can use. You'll have a tool you can dip into and you can try. And you'll try 10 different tools or 20 different tools and it won't work. And then you'll try the one thing that does work. And like, this is where all like the meditation and the ice baths and all that come in. For most people, it doesn't fucking work. Because their lives aren't set up in a way that's going to optimize them. It just stresses them out more because now they have to go and do all these
extra thing.
I have to do 19 different things in order to get out of bed in the morning, and I have to have my fucking, is it a heated sheet now or a cooled sheet? And how much sun do I have to get in the morning? But the sun doesn't come up here. It's fucking raining today. And then,
morning routine.
Like all this
stressed
stuff,
out going into work.
You're more stressed.
Yeah,
so I'm a big fan of the bro science and routines and Hoopmans and all this. Big fan. But I take very little and apply it. But it's the bits I apply that have the biggest difference. And for me, I have a cheat code because I sit down here with people and do a podcast. So I have literally the guy, Adam, come in and taught me on a podcast. And my excuse is, I'm doing this for work on the podcast.
This is my job.
This is my job. And he's literally here trying to teach me to stop being such a raving lunatic and calm down the golden nuggets inside. So I'm lucky that I get to do that. But to be fair, I set the environment up like that.
And you expose others to it for free.
Yes.
Because they can listen to your podcast, you know? Yeah. And that's how I got like all of these learnings, I suppose, is listening to podcasts, reading books, like as fucking outdated as it sounds, everyone's now read a podcast, listen to a book. But like I always say to my clients, a book is someone's life work that you get access to. Imagine that, like, but I'm going to round up this podcast with one line.
Don't do it, keep going.
The one line, because it nicely summarizes everything that we've just said. And that is, knowledge does not equate to action. And, you know, as you said, people might think we're talking shit, or people might realize, shit, they're just like maybe one step ahead of me. Maybe, you know, maybe if even. Exactly, maybe. And they might say they're onto something here, and take, as you said, a little bit of this or a little bit of that, and you don't have to apply it right now. But when something comes up, and you mentally, okay, right, they were talking about that, I can do this now. Use it. And just repeat that over and over. Like, honestly, like anything in life, Dan, you know, to get from A to B or to progress or to be better, there is never, ever going to be one big, massive action that you take that changes it.
Yeah.
It's always, always coming back to these tiny little things. And that was it for me. It was, through therapy, I had the awareness to realize that I wasn't living a life that I wanted to live and that I could change it. And I didn't expect to change it overnight, but I started to do these tiny little things, and it's led me to here. Like, it's that butterfly effect, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, any decision that you made in the past, if you had made a different decision, you mightn't be sitting here. I mightn't be sitting here.
100%. Yeah. And in my experience, you could probably speak to this as well. It's not supposed to be easy. It's so cliched. But like these things, we think, oh, okay, if I meditate, I'm going to feel immediately better. It is one of the most frustrating things ever for me to do, to try and sit down and meditate. I'm so frustrated a lot of the time afterwards. So people are like, why are you forcing yourself? I don't force myself to meditate. But you'll find something that just aligns with you. It just fits. Doesn't necessarily have to feel great. And probably, actually, no, almost definitely won't feel great the first 6 months to a year you do it, which is why you can't do all of it. You can't just do all these different things. But like you said there, picking that one thing that just resonates for some reason, whatever it might be. It's different for everybody. And then trusting. There's a huge element of trust. I trust. I am not, like, my business-wise, personal-wise, nowhere near where I want to be. And I'm making decisions semi-regularly that I still can't see the results from. And that's terrifying and very frustrating. And a lot of the days, like, some days I woke up, didn't happen today, but some days I wake up and doing podcasts and stuff. I'm like, what's the fucking point of this? Like, I'm not seeing the return.
Yeah.
But I know what the alternative feels like, and I don't want that. So I'm like, okay, well, I trust this. And also I have great sources of verification. I have people who are ahead of me in the journey going, yeah, feels shit, doesn't it? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, yeah, it's going to keep feeling shit, but you just get better at not dealing with the shit as in like stuffing it down, but you get better at managing and creating that space and identifying the things that work for you and becoming aware and not shouting at people who cut you off. You just get better at doing that because none of the other stuff changes. But I think we're waiting for the world to change around us to validate the decisions that we're making. Because when you have a drink or you eat a bit of cake, it does change temporarily. You get that dopamine kick. When you fucking get out of bed and do 10 push-ups, you don't get that dopamine kick until afterwards down the road. And then six months to a year later, you might start to see some changes in your physique and you're like, oh, this was because of the year at work.
Yeah.
But it's so not immediate gratification. So yeah, that would be my experience of this whole thing. It's just it's a grind. It's hard, but it's so worthwhile personally for me. The decisions that I've made to this point, I'm very, very happy I've had the help to make them. I've had the support to be able to continue making them, and that I made them. I'm really, really happy because it's fundamentally changed me from that person I described in my 20s to now. I'm a completely different person. And that's 5-6 years. I've completely fundamentally changed and I still feel like I'm quite young. So there's loads to do there. So the reason I say that is these podcasts, shelf help, I call all these books. Like I have a shelf full of books over there, shelf help, because I've read them all. Didn't do anything in any of them the first time I read them. And now I'm very selective. I'll try and go back and say, okay, what's the one thing that just resonates? Because like all of these other books are telling me to do all these things, but they don't feel right to me. They feel really misaligned with who I want to be. But this thing feels pretty, like podcasting regularly feels pretty good to me. And I'm now 100 episodes deep, see the positive outcomes of that, because I can now sit and tell you about this conversation I had with Adam, who helped me understand what happiness was and made me cry over my child's little baby sock.
Your sock.
Yeah. So compassion for yourself, but there'll be resistance, not like crippling difficulty. There'll be resistance. It's probably how you know it's a good direction.
Yeah, I love that to finish off that, like, it's not going to be easy, but you also mentioned there a second ago, it is going to be worth it. And
for me, yeah.
Yeah, for you and for me and for probably everybody, if they're headed in the right direction, they're not being pulled by external sources. That's what we're trying to talk about.
Yeah.
It's just, what do you want? Head in that direction. And actually, we haven't really talked about failure, maybe on another podcast, but expect that it's not going to work out all of the time. That's another area that can hold people back. But that circles back to what you were saying earlier. This is all just coming full circle. Comparison. Fear of failure is because we're not living up to the standards that other people set. We're embarrassed. Embarrassment, I said in a recent, we're going to talk forever. Embarrassment.
Turn off this mic.
Embarrassment is the cost of entry. Like if you want to get from here to there, you have to be willing to look like a fucking idiot because you don't know what you're doing. How are you supposed to know?
Yeah.
Unless you do it.
We're going to look back at this podcast in a year's time, 2 years' time, and be like, oh,
Dan.
We're guaranteed
literally mid-podcast, I was like, I'm going to look back on this and be like, what the fuck were you talking about?
I genuinely do that a lot. I'm like, what shite was I spouting? But like, realistically, this is where my head is right now. It's probably going to be different, and I'm cool with that. I'm okay with that. Like, and you're probably the same, but we look back and go, Jesus Christ, let's delete that one and do another one.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, thank you so much for coming on.
I love that. Thank you very much for having me on.
And come here, there's like, I feel like there is so much in there. And for everybody listening, like you said a second ago, take a small thing, one thing I'm sure you resonated with you in that podcast, and start applying it and do it over and over with different books, because I read all the time. I listen to podcasts all the time, and it's not like that whole episode changed my life, but maybe I got one little bit of information from that and I've started thinking about it. So listen, if you got anything from that podcast, make sure to drop it into your WhatsApp group and share it with anybody you think it would help. And as always, look after yourself and keep her lit. I will chat to you soon.